And we're live.
All right, it's Hebrews episode 6.
Yeah, welcome back, guys. We're here. We're back with the same mugs. How does Jesus make his coffee? He brews it. My favorite mug.
And I got I'll be back. Maybe I'll have something new next week, but I've come to like this mug a lot, actually.
Yep. Our favorites. All right, I'm going to give our layout for this episode. I have a mosquito bite on my back, so I'll keep itching it. But anyways, I'm going to try to not think about it. PE is going to lead us through Hebrews chapter 2, a devotional, in a second. Now, but let me give us our layout. Our podcast is actually headed in a new direction. We had a discussion and with a little bit of thought and prayer, we decided that we would actually fit our podcast under this theme. And the theme is This is Ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to talk about ministry for those of you who are curious about ministry, for those of you who are interested in ministry, for those of you who just want to know more about ministry, or want to hear some funny stories, testimonies while we're serving in ministry, or even maybe for some of you who are in ministry right now, we thought this would be really helpful for you guys to actually hear, but also for anybody just in general in church who wants to gain a general deeper understanding and insight into ministry and what it's like. Maybe grow your appreciation for those who are called to serve. But today we're going to be talking about calling to ministry. We're going to share testimonies. We're going to talk about a couple other things that have to do with ministry.
Right.
But that's going to be fun. And then our secondary segment, we're also going to be a little more consistent with this. We're going to talk about a mission spotlight. PE has a story for us. And then we're going to talk about something relating to Christian news, because I think it's important for us as Christians as people in general, to be aware of what's happening in the world.
Right.
But we're going to give it a little bit a different perspective. We're going to give the Christian news. So any news that I feel like Christians should be aware of, or maybe not even necessarily should be aware of, but is interesting to know. And we're going to give our little 2 cents on it. And then we're going to react to a sermon clip. I know one time we reacted to like an influencer TikTok type video, but this time we're going to be reacting to a little snippet of a preacher that I'm very fond of. And I know P is as well. Yeah. Yep. So P, without further ado,
all right,
lead us through the words of God.
Sure. Today is just going to be one verse. It's Hebrews chapter 2, verse 1. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 1. I'll just read it for us. It says, therefore we must pay much closer attention to what we have heard, lest we drift away from it. Amen. So it says therefore. So that means we have to go back to what chapter 1 was talking about. And chapter 1 basically was talking about how superior the Son of God, Jesus, is, right? He's above angels. He is God himself. And so in light of that, the fact that he is the one that has made a way for us to receive salvation, he says we must pay much closer attention to what we have heard. And this having heard has the idea of not just hearing. In this case, it will be the gospel, right? To pay much closer attention means we should be meditating upon the gospel. But at the same time, it's also doing, as a sense of doing. So we're living out God's word, not just hearing it, but also living it out. And he says we should do that, paying much closer attention to that. So that what? So we don't drift away from the gospel. Drifting away, if you think about it, is actually pretty easy to do. You don't have to do anything. You'll just slowly drift away. And the illustration I have is like, if you've ever been on a boat, like a rowboat, and you don't have the anchor in, you just sit there and the boat will slowly drift whatever direction the water is going, right? But what the writer of Hebrews is saying, we should meditate and pay much closer attention to these things, meaning we should anchor down on Jesus so that we stay in one spot. So we stay rooted in Jesus. And that comes from reading and doing God's word, more specifically reading and meditating upon the gospel. I think a lot of Christians, they hear the gospel and that's how, we receive salvation. And then they think, okay, what's next? But I'm here to tell you there is no what's next. The gospel is everything. So it's simple enough for the unbeliever to come to know Christ and receive salvation, but it's also deep enough for the believer to mature in their faith. So for our viewers out there and listeners, I just want to encourage you. It's time that we pay much closer attention to what we have heard, the gospel.
Mm.
Not just hear it, but also do it. Stay rooted, anchored in Christ, so that we don't drift away. Because it is so easy to drift away. We lose when we lose sight of God, and the world is so busy. I hear all the time. I ask people how they're doing. There's like, oh, it's been so busy. Just one week just flew by. Like, and we live in that kind of world. And it's so easy for us to forget and drift away. But the writer of Hebrews encourages us to stay rooted, anchored in Christ, because He is the Son of God. He is the one who made the way for salvation. So that's just my thought today. Chapter 2, verse 1.
Hey man, that's a good word. I think the more and more I follow Jesus, the more I realize it's not overcomplicated. The
Mhm.
simple, fundamental things are truly, it's everything. Like we have to go back to emphasizing reading the words of God. We have to go back to prayer and the genuineness of it, the sincerity of it, and our
Mhm.
faith in the power of prayer, and going back to the gospel and reminding ourselves of who saved us and when we were called. I actually think I know what the problem is. The lighting is yellow. We can continue after this, but I think it's supposed to be white. I'm blinded. But yeah, that's a little better. All right. Anyways, this was take 2 because we had to fix our lighting. But yeah, thank you, PE. That was a good word. That was encouraging to me. But yeah, let's talk about our callings. Talking about, speaking of, simple and going back to the beginning, the origins. Let's talk about our callings into, I believe, ministry, correct?
Mhm.
I can start.
Sure.
I'm actually serving at the church that I grew up in. And
Mm.
I've never had, and I hope that this is going to be helpful and encouraging to some people. Though the story has it's pretty rocky. It's got its ups and downs.
Mhm.
I hope my testimony is encouraging to those who've experienced church hurt. And so I serve at this church, which will remain unnamed for the time being, at least, with a completely different leadership, right? And so this is a different leadership from the story itself, but the and I have to give credit where credit is due. When my family first came to America, the former senior pastor at this church, they like took us in like literally into their family. We showed up to like their family gatherings and all these things, and so it was amazing, right? But our youth, like many youth groups do, we experienced a season of not having a youth pastor,
Mm.
and the few that we received or that we had, they were like kind of like seasonal, or like
Mm.
they weren't planning to be there full time, or and they weren't ill intended, right? But they just never stayed long.
Mm.
Um, and so towards the end of my youth, we just didn't have a youth pastor, and then post youth, um, well, let me backtrack a little bit. My dream before being called into ministry was to become an actor, and so that was my dream, right? I wanted to go to Hollywood. I wanted to make a name for myself. I wanted to be big, right? Um, to glorify myself, essentially, right? Provide for my family and whatnot. But when I got into college and as I was pursuing this dream of mine, I really felt like the Lord was calling me to lead worship. And so I joined the worship ministry, and there I learned many things from discipline and the joys of worshiping and leading worship, doing ministry. But the biggest thing I learned was um, like a joy for salvation, like a
Mm.
joy for winning over souls, because I believed and I was convinced that the Lord didn't call me to be a praise leader, but a worship leader, teaching
Mm.
the kids how to surrender to the Lord and worship Him.
Yeah.
And so every single week, I made it a point to have Bible studies with my worship team, and I would preach the gospel.
Mm.
And long story short, my prayer for 4 years straight, as I was serving as the worship leader throughout my years in college, was to save every single member in the worship team. And by the
Mm.
time I left, there was one person left who didn't. And then, like literally, like 2 weeks before I left, he gave his life to the Lord. And so
Amen.
I was like, wow, God, like you're so good. That was the final affirmation that, Lord, you truly called me to lead worship. And
Mm.
my plan was, all right, finally time to move on and go to, California, Hollywood, Georgia, Atlanta, New York, whatever it was, to pursue my dreams. But then I was at a retreat, my final youth retreat, to lead worship there, not as a student. And there was this guy. There was a guest speaker, which I appreciate so much, and you'll understand why in a sec. But his name was Pastor Paul. I don't know his last name, but he was this very like excited guy, and he had broken English, but still like we understood him well enough. And he went up there and he preached, and he had this really interesting like philosophy on at the very least for our retreat speaking. He was like, I'm gonna be speaking, but I'm just a man, and so like if you guys want to, you guys can be laid back, you can sit down on the floor, you can lay down, you can fall asleep if you want. I'm just gonna do my thing. And we were like, what the heck? But like he truly believed this, and he said, with that being said, he said, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, if you guys have a question or an opposition to anything I say, speak up. And I really appreciated that. And he meant it too. And I remember it was one of the nights where he was giving a sermon, and he said something along the lines of like, everybody is saved. They just haven't received salvation. And so it was probably it was a hiccup, like English issue, right? But just in case, like I raised my hand because he welcomed it, right? So I raised my hand and he stopped the sermon. He's like, yes. And he called me like Teacher Sam because I wasn't a student. And he said, Teacher Sam, yes. And I said, you say that this is, everybody's saved, but that not everyone has received salvation. But I basically said, but in the words of God, it says that, you have to repent and then you will receive salvation, eternal life. And then like we go back and forth a little bit. I think there was miscommunication a bit, but we basically concluded with, okay, we'll talk later about it. But because I spoke up and because of, the little bit of influence I had over the youth because of the 4 years I spent with them, and we had a new youth pastor, by the way, at this point, that's important to mention. He was brand new and he was leading this retreat. A lot of people were kind of divided and they took that kind of as like an opposition. And so like people were talking after the sermon, like, oh my gosh, did you hear like Sam, like he like spoke against the guest speaker and whatnot. And like even afterwards, like some of the kids were asking me like what I meant, and I was flipping to some places in scripture and I was like, this is what I mean, right? But the new youth pastor, which I'll leave unnamed, he's a good guy, but he felt like I was also opposing, because he brought his friend on and he felt I was opposing his authority. And we had a couple like headbutts here, but and so it makes sense. And so like he pulled me aside and said, hey, like you can't do this and whatnot and whatever it is. Interestingly enough, the counselors also didn't understand why I brought that question up. He was like, what he's saying made sense. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, and actually the guest speaker the next morning, after everyone that wasn't a student kind of like told me to like not speak up anymore, the guest speaker himself like caught me like as we were walking to the cafeteria. He said, hey, Sam, I actually really appreciate you talking, you speaking up. And he asked me, hey, just out of curiosity, what do you want to be when you're older? Like, what are your dreams, your goals? And I told him, I want to be an actor. and much like P and I, he started laughing. And I was offended. I was like, what the heck? Like, I don't know this guy. Why are you laughing at me? But I didn't say that. And so it's kind of like, it was kind of passive aggressive, but I was like, why do you ask, right? Like, why are you asking what I want to be? And he said, oh, it's because, the way that you think is not normal. He said, it's very seminarian-like. And that's all the conversation. Like, I was so shocked that he said that I didn't say anything else. Now, just to preface, going into ministry was the last thing I wanted to do. I remember as a kid, my grandma, because I've always had like a deeper voice, my grandma, as a joke, very faithful woman, she's with the Lord now, she would make jokes with me even as a little kid. I was like 5, 6 years old, like, oh, you're gonna be a pastor one day because of your voice. And I remember even at 5 or 6, I'd be like, heck no, like I don't want to be a pastor. That sounds terrible. And I remember even in the 8th grade, when it was sophomore year of high school, when I first started to think like, oh, I want to be an actor. I remember at another retreat, the guest speaker was talking about, what if the Lord called you? I don't even know what the theme was or the sermon was about, but I remember this one part. He said, what if God called you to be a pastor or a missionary? Would you be able to let go of your dreams, your life, and just follow him? And for some reason, I felt like that was for me. And I remember praying, God, don't call me into ministry. I literally prayed that God wouldn't. And ever since I had that conversation with the guest speaker, and he told me that, seminary and whatnot, I prayed another prayer. And I was like, God, if you're calling me to seminary, I need you to prove it. Right. For those of you who don't know, seminary is like Bible school, basically, right? It's for people who want to, it's like a master's degree program for those who want to go into ministry. And I prayed that prayer, and that night, that same night, the guest speaker came up and he actually told everybody he was wrong. He was like, I was wrong. Teacher Sam was right. Let me explain. And he explained, and I actually really appreciated that because everybody else was kind of attacking me, right? And I was like, wow, like that shows a lot of humility to admit that even if everyone's on your side. He didn't have to do that, right? Like he could have just
Yeah.
moved on.
Yeah.
And then he went on to say, I feel like the Lord is calling me to preach a different sermon than I prepared. He was like, I had a different sermon prepared, but I really feel like God is calling me to preach this sermon. And he talked about calling. And he preached on, and he used me as the illustration. He was like, Pastor Sam, Teacher Sam just told me that he wants to be an actor. And imagine if this was a house, right? And God was using you guys as a tool to build this house. And he was like, and let's say Teacher Sam was trying to be a screw, but he was really supposed to be a hammer, right? Like God can still use him to like screw a nail, but like for nails you're supposed to hammer it. And it was like this really like silly illustration. But basically his point was like God could have a greater purpose for you, right? That was kind of like the first like sign that God has given to me, like, no, like I'm calling you actually to like consider this and pray about it. But for me it wasn't enough, and I was like, God, prove to me again, right? Show me something else. Like I need to know for sure if you're calling me to ministry, if I'm going to do this. So I didn't tell anybody about this, but I went home from the retreat and I worked at this smoothie cafe. As I was working, this guy comes up, a great friend of mine now, but he was a stranger then. His name's Vincent Song. And there was a huge line behind him, but he asked me, he said, hey, like, do you go to church? And I was in my like tropical smoothie uniform and I was working, and I was like, and I thought that was really strange. And I was like, oh, I do. I go to church around here. I serve as the worship leader. And he says, wow, like I'm thinking about going to seminary. And I was like, no way. Like I literally just prayed about this a week ago. And so even though there was a line behind him, I didn't care. And I was like, hey, can I ask you just real quick, like you're about your calling to ministry? Like, did you get called to go to seminary? And he said, you know what? I'd love to meet up with you later this week. I have a book to give you. It's about calling. And he never called, right? I gave him my number. He never called, but like just simply meeting him and him bringing up seminary. And by the way, I met him way later in seminary, and we talked about that moment. We laughed about it. It was a good time. He guest spoke at one of our retreats. But that was another little thing that I felt like the Lord sent another person to me. But I wasn't enough, and I was like, God, I'm still not 100% sure. That could have been a coincidence. God proved to me again. And what started happening in the background was word got out. Word got back to the church that I spoke up, even though like the guest speaker said that, I was right and whatnot. Right. The former leadership, they also felt like I was opposing the leadership of the church. And so the senior pastor calls me and he said, hey, how are you doing? And I was like, I'm good. He's like, how's your family? Oh, they're good. So we had a good relationship. But and he said, hey, like I heard about what happened. Can you explain to me from your side? And I explained to him, yeah, like, I believe the words of God say that we have to, test what any teacher or preacher says with the words of God. The guest speaker welcomed it. And so like I rose my hand, and, it seemed like he welcomed it and he was fine with it. He's like, okay, great. Sure. Like just to like make sure, it's like, he said, I would love to meet with you and the youth pastor and all the staff. And so he called a meeting. He called a meeting with all of the staff and me alone. And so it was nerve-wracking, right? And I was like, okay, now I have to tell my mom what happened. And so actually my mom heard before I told her. My mom called me and was like, hey, Chuan, like I need you to come home. I need to talk to you. So I come home. My mom's freaking out. She's like, why is everyone talking about you like being a false teacher? like why did you speak up? What happened at the retreat? And I explained to her what happened. And she said, just tell the senior pastor exactly what you told me. It'll be fine. She was like, I trust you. But I was freaking out because like now my mom knows, and I'm meeting with the pastors of the church about this thing. And the former worship leader, he moved to Texas to pursue his dreams as a dental technician, which by the way, he ended up being a pastor too. And I called him. Actually, I think he texted me and he said, hey, how are you doing? How are things? How's the ministry? And I was like, hey, Hyung, can we call and can we talk about it? And I shared him all of this. And I was like, Hyung, I'm freaking out. I'm scared, right? but I shared with him, and he was the only person. I didn't tell my mom that I was calling to ministry. I didn't tell any of the pastors. I was like, Hyung, I feel like the Lord is calling me to ministry, but I don't know.
Mm.
And this is a man that I looked up to, that I respected, who discipled me in many ways, but in many ways that I feared. Like I held him to such a standard that I was like, oh, this guy, like, I know that he's going to yell at me and critique me for taking, pastoral ministry lightly, and he's gonna shut this whole thing down.
Mm.
That was my view. I told him that, literally thinking like, okay, Mingi Young is gonna stop this whole like, am I being called to ministry thing. And he said, and he actually doesn't remember this actually, which is kind of funny. But he told me, he was like, Chuan, which is my Korean name. He said, if God is calling you to ministry, he said, I believe that you will be used, that you will be a leader much greater than I was. And because of how much I respected this brother, older brother in Christ, I just started crying. And at that point, I was almost convinced. I was like, okay, God, if you're calling me to ministry, like, I'll go. The next day, I meet with the pastors, and I'm freaking out. I'm like nervous. Before I go into the meeting, I think it was that weekend actually, this guy named Pastor Mark, I didn't really have a close relationship with him, but he was the EC pastor at the time. And he pulls me aside and he says, hey, I'm hearing things. Like, what happened? Like, I know you. I know you wouldn't do some of the things I'm hearing. He says, what happened? And so I explained to him what happened. I explained to him like the reason why I spoke up, because one, he welcomed it, but also the words that got promoted. And he was like, you know what? Like, yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I don't agree with what he said as a mistake because it was broken English. And he said, you can be confident that you have one person with you in that room that is on your side. And so I felt a little comforted going to that meeting. But we went into that meeting and we prayed, and the senior pastor was very friendly. And he said, let me just hear from your perspective what happened. I explained to him everything in detail. I didn't share that I was being called into ministry. And the senior pastor says, you know what, that's great. And he said, the church really appreciates your ministry as the worship leader. And then he said, but I've placed this youth pastor as the authority of the youth. And he said, I cannot have you opposing his authority. And so he said, from now on, I want you to lead praise and praise only. No more Bible studies, no more teaching, no more nothing. But remember, I believe the Lord was calling me to preach the gospel to the worship team. And so I told him, and this was crazy thinking back on it, but I told him, I'm sorry, but I can't do that. I believe the Lord has called me to do more than lead praise. If you're asking me to stop preaching the gospel or teaching the gospel to these kids, sharing the gospel, then I can't stop doing that. And he said, if you don't stop, right, you have to leave the church. And so for me, I was shocked because he said, if you don't stop sharing the gospel, you have to leave the church. And I was like, listen, like, I'll agree to like conversing with the youth pastor, like partnering with him and like him like having authority even over my ministry, but like, I'm not going to stop sharing the gospel. And then I started talking about, I feel like the Lord is calling me into ministry. And I started getting emotional and I started tearing up. And I was like, I don't even know if this is really what the Lord is calling me to do, but I feel like this is why all of this is happening. And then he continues to say, that's awesome, but if you don't stop, you have to leave our church. And so I was literally about to be excommunicated, right? And then Pastor Mark, the one who said that he was on my side, he spoke up. And not only did he speak up, he was like, he blew up, like he freaked out. He was like, I'm sorry, like, stop. He literally told the senior pastor to stop, and he was like, this is ridiculous. He started, and then the senior pastor started to stop him, but then he rose his voice and started yelling and said, no, you stop. And he said, I'm sorry, but this young man is literally saying he's being called into ministry, and here you are telling him to stop preaching the gospel. And he was like, we should be teaching him. We should be discipling him and preparing him. And he went off on this rant, and like, I was so touched. And the senior pastor just like fell silent. And then like after he was done, the senior pastor actually admitted, you know what, I think you're right. And he looked at me and he said, you know what? Like, continue doing what you're doing, but I encourage you to be discipled by Pastor Mark. but you also have to submit to, the youth pastor. And I agreed. And the meeting concluded in this way. I walked out. Pastor Daniel, whom we know and love, he looked at me and gave me a thumbs up and he smiled. He walked away. Pastor Mark, he pulled me aside and said, and we were just talking. And I actually asked him, I was like, Pastor Mark, I don't even know what this means, but can you actually disciple me? And he was like, I would love to. And we met up for 2 years, every single week, usually on Fridays. And for those 2 years, he taught me how to read the words of God on my own, to interpret, to teach. And I still keep in touch with him today, to this day. And then I went home, and this is the final part. I went home and I told my mom everything that happened. And I told my mom, and my mom, she's my ride or die. She was my biggest supporter of my dream to be an actor. And if for those of you who know my mom, she has a really big stage presence. And so she loved the fact that somebody amongst her kids was following her in her footsteps. But I told this whole story. I shared what happened at the retreat again. I shared that I felt the Lord was calling me to ministry. I shared that what happened in the meeting. I shared what Pastor Mark did for me. And since that day, my mom has called Pastor Mark my guardian angel. And she loves Pastor Mark now. But my mom, she was just silent this whole time. And I told her, yeah, Ma, I feel like God is calling me to be a pastor. And my mom, she started crying. And I thought she was crying because she didn't agree. But she said, I'll support you. I'll be praying for you. Yeah, let's pray about this. And she walked away. And I found out later she was crying because she knows how hard it is to be a pastor. And that she couldn't imagine, without getting emotional, the life that her son was going to lead, being a pastor, with all the grief and the stress that we go through. And then my dad, he found out later from my mom. He made jokes about it. He's like, "You think being a pastor is a joke?" He's like, "You got to go through school." He's like, "You hate school," and we were joking about it. And I was like, "Yeah, but God's calling me." And I had this other pastor, Hyung, who found out months later when I started to doubt. Because at that point I was affirmed. I was like, God, you're calling me, I'll go. And there was this huge peace, this burden lifted off my shoulders. And when that shortly after I started to doubt, the enemy started attacking me, saying, are you sure? God is calling you. And this Hyung hits me up, who I haven't met in a long time. He's like, hey, I heard you're getting called to ministry, so let's meet up. And I told him my story. And he was like, and this is what he said, and he's actually quoting from the scriptures, not in the same context, but he says, Juan, your story felt like drops of rain in the desert. And he said, because for 6 years of ministry, I haven't seen anybody being called to ministry. I didn't see many fruits. And he said, to be honest, I called this meeting because I knew your upbringing. And he was like, I called this meeting so that I could chew you out, right, and rebuke you, and actually tell you to stop taking ministry lightly. And he was like, but I see the Lord is calling you. And so time and time again, the Lord has affirmed my calling to ministry. Even now, and this is all I'll say, but even now, people who have known me will find out that I'm a pastor, or will hear I'm a pastor and will be like, that guy. And so yeah, it's crazy that the Lord has called me to ministry, especially me, somebody like me. But yeah, that was my calling to ministry. Yeah, I guess that's it. And here we are now, 2 years, actually years later. But yeah.
Wow. Quite a story.
Have you heard this story before?
Bits and pieces. I think that this is the first time hearing all of it in its entirety. For me too, I think you have to receive a calling in order to even think about ministry.
Yeah.
And so for me, I grew up in a Christian home. My dad received his calling to be a pastor kind of late, when I was in elementary, middle school. And by the time he finished seminary, I was a freshman in high school. So from then on, I became a PK kind of late. But after I graduated from undergrad, my dad found a church that he can serve at down in Charlotte. But at that time, I was unrelated to my major. I was a sociology major, but I was working at a law firm in DC. I thought it was great. Actually, I had no interest in law, but after working there, I was like, oh, law is actually pretty interesting. I was actually thinking about pursuing law, and I was going to start
great.
studying for LSATs, and try to get into law school. But at that point was when we moved to Charlotte. And in Charlotte, the first year or so, it was like the worst time of my life. Like I didn't know anybody. I'm in this like new city. All my friends are up in like Nova, Maryland area, and I'm just like every month I'll drive up. It's like 7 hours to get to Nova. So I'll drive like 7 and then stay for like a couple weeks at my cousin's house and then like drive back down. So I was doing that for a while. Then finally, like just out of like desperation, I was just praying to God, like, God, what do you want me to do? Like you brought me to this, this like, the boondocks, right? To this like countryside where I don't know anybody. I can't even find like a job. I'm just like, God, like, what do you want me to do? And I started going to morning prayer, and like really seeking the Lord on like the direction. Cause I was complaining to God, like, God, I want to go back to like, to where, all my friends are, where I'm familiar with everything. And in the midst of that, I felt like, God was, calling me into ministry. And the thing was like, what I was doing at the time was helping my dad. There was like 5 youth, and I was helping just as a volunteer. Just I wasn't preaching, obviously, because I wasn't a pastor, but I would just like hold Bible study. I would do like events, like take them to the amusement park, or do like fun fellowship things. So it started with that. But then, like, as I was seeking the Lord and like my future direction, I really felt like He was putting in me like a real big heart for the youth. Like it's just something I could not quench. I'm like, I don't want. No, thank you. I don't want to be. I don't want to do youth. Like, I just kept fighting it, but that fire kept on growing in me.
Yeah.
And even though I didn't like ask for a sign, since He started pouring that fire in me, like every week we would have new youth. To the point where in 1 year we went from 5 to 50.
Wow.
And I took that as like a sign. But yeah, we went from 5 to 50, and just youth just kept on coming. Kind of like what we're experiencing here at our current church. And so I said, God, like, I don't think I'm equipped or qualified to become pastor. I started praying that way, and He kept reminding me, like, hey, it's me that's doing it, not you. And it got to a point where I was reminded of what Moses was doing, right? He kept on rejecting, and then God got angry, right? So I was like, all right, let me stop before God gets angry with me. God gets angry with me. So I was like, okay, God, I'll submit. I'll go into ministry. But then I didn't go right away. I guess we're going to talk about seminary too. So it's kind of segue into this,
Right.
but I didn't go to seminary right away. The excuse was I'm going to save up money. So I started working like as a waiter. How much can you make as a waiter, right? But that was my excuse. I just kept pushing it off. Like, God, I just want to save up money because seminary is pretty expensive, and I need to be able to pay for my education. So I kept pushing it off. And so I was working at a place that's kind of like Cracker Barrel. They got the porch and the rocking chair and like the inside with all that. And one day I was going to work, and like all the furniture that was outside, all the outdoor furniture was gone. There were no cars in the parking lot. There was like, I was okay, maybe, even though I was afternoon shift, I was like, maybe something happened. I tried to open the door. It's all locked. There's like no lights on inside. And I drove home. I was like, God, I found out later that they shut down without telling anybody. The owners just shut down because they just started it up. I guess
really?
they just started this up. And I think my theory is that they just ran out of money, and it was not making enough money so they can sustain. But anyways, I was driving home. I'm like, if you shut down a whole restaurant for me to like go to seminary, then okay. So I went home and I applied right then.
Oh wow.
For seminary. I just went on the computer. I applied. So I started at Gordon Conwell. They have a Charlotte branch.
Oh wow.
So that's where I learned Hebrew. Really, I love the Hebrew teacher. Like, of course, I forgot everything now, but during that time, it was really fun. She taught in a very interactive way. But I learned Hebrew 2 years, and then I transferred over to Southeastern, so Southern Baptist Seminary, and finished out my education there.
Yeah.
But when I was moving, because now I had to move away from my dad's church, because before I was still able to help my dad's church while I went to seminary. But I just felt like God was calling me to Southeastern, which I don't regret. It was the greatest, experience and really good education that I received. But so now I had to kind of get out of my dad's church and move on. So I started praying to God, like, hey, God, like, I'm going to seminary now. That's like 4 hours away. I'm going to be there. Like, do you want me to just focus on school and not do any ministry and just do like another like part-time job, just random job? Or do you want me to like serve a church while I'm doing ministry? Kind of like what you're doing.
While you're doing seminary.
Yeah, while doing seminary. So I was praying, and I forget how I heard about it, but there was some like youth pastor position that was open at a church nearby. So I sent an email to the senior pastor, put in my resume. I didn't hear back for like a week. So I thought, okay, maybe he just rejected me. But then at that point, I was praying, and God was telling me to fast. He told me to fast 40 days, like 40 days, right? And I said, God, are you sure? Like, I love food. I love to eat. So I prayed, for like 3-4 days before I started. But then I felt like God was telling me to do the 40-day fast. So I started, and I survived on. I was just drinking liquids. So like chocolate milk was a lifesaver. Seriously, like chocolate milk. I was downing it. But so I started the 40-day fast, and then like 2 weeks into the fast, I get a response from that pastor that I put a resume in, and he says, "Hey, when can you come on this date to preach to the youth and during the youth service?" And that date was the day after when my fast ended.
Wow.
So I was like, "Yeah, I'll be there." And so I was preaching out of Psalms, I remember, and it was my first, I guess, like official sermon. So I like showed my dad and my mom, like, just to make sure the script was okay. And they're like, "Oh yeah, I think it's a good sermon." So I went up there, preached, and then met with the senior pastor afterwards. And he wasn't even in attendance at the youth service, but he had one of his trusted deacons kind of sit in the whole time. I guess they talked briefly, but after that, they interviewed me, and he said, "Hey, can you start next month?"
Wow.
And that was about when I had to move up anyway, because I was taking a summer class. I said, okay, I mean, it's kind of short notice, but yes, I think I could do that. So I went down, I told my parents, I said goodbye to my dad's church. I moved up, and then that was the first, I guess, I don't want to, like, of course, serving at my dad's church does count, but it kind of like, since it's my dad, you know what I mean?
You don't really like.
Yeah, I don't really count it as one, but technically that is my first. Yeah. But this is my official first, like at a random place. I didn't know anyone.
Yeah.
And I did ministry there for 3 years, and the kids were, and they're all like your age now, or like a little bit older. So it's been a long time, but so yeah, I was doing seminary and serving at that church for 3 years, and funny thing is that after seminary, the senior pastor, I could tell he really wanted me to like stay. So he was trying to figure out a way, because he was like, "You're too young to do like EC, but you're kind of getting up there to do like youth." So he asked me like, "Hey, would you be open to going to Korea to do like English ministry?" It was Pastor Billy Kim. He's like the senior pastor. They have like a Baptist church. It's a Baptist church, obviously, because I was serving at a Baptist church.
Yeah.
And they had a school for kids, and he said, "Yeah, you'll be like an English teacher there during the week, and then also do English ministry there on the weekends." So I really thought about it and prayed about it, but I felt like at the time, it wouldn't really be ministry, because I felt like at that time, I don't know about now in Korea, but at that time, people would just come in because they want to learn English. I didn't want that. Like, I didn't want them sitting in English service, not understanding anything, but their sole purpose was just to learn English. So I said, thanks, but like, no thanks.
Yeah.
So at that time, I had another option, because the associate pastor that worked at that church, like a year before I graduated, moved out to Sacramento to be a senior pastor. And then he contacted me saying like, "Hey, aren't you like about to graduate soon? We want to come and do youth here." So I ended up going there, right? There's a lot of things happen, but in the just long story short, I ended up going there. But yeah, that's kind of basically how I got started in
Wow.
ministry. And I thought I would be in youth ministry forever. Like
Mhm.
I loved youth. It was like my first love. Like I still love the youth. I feel most comfortable, I guess, if I'm being quite honest with the youth, because that's what I've been doing.
Mm.
But now on this new journey here at this church, doing college and up, it's been great too. We have a great group, and um, it's like kind of treading on into new territory
Yeah.
because they're not really youth anymore, right? They're a
Mhm.
bit older,
Yeah.
so kind of adjusting to that. But yeah, so just kind of going back to our main theme here, calling is so important because a lot of people, I feel like when I was in seminary, I don't know about you, but a lot of people go into seminary thinking that, oh, seminary is easy and they have nothing else to do, but they want to get an education in something, so they come and join. But actually, seminary is really tough,
Yeah.
and the dropout rate is actually pretty high.
Mm.
I don't know all the numbers, but I don't know all the numbers, but the dropout rate is really high, and I still remember because I was rooming with three other people, so there's four of us, and one guy, I don't know where he's at now, but like I just remember he would just play World of Warcraft all day, right? And we're like, hey, don't you have like a paper due today? He's like, oh yeah, don't worry, I'm just gonna do it. I'm gonna turn it in late. And he just kept on doing that. He just ended up like just dropping
Oh
out.
no.
But I'm sure there's so many other people like that,
Mhm.
thinking that seminary is so easy. They come in and realize it's hard, and then they just drop out. But for those who have a calling, I believe those are the ones who are able to stick it out to the end
Yeah.
and finish school.
Mhm.
And the ones who have a calling are the ones who are able to continue in ministry without dropping out, so
Yeah.
to speak, or like retiring or giving up. Because I think I told you last week I was reading a book and they said in the United States alone, 1,500 pastors just stopped doing ministry per month, which
Yeah,
is
it's crazy.
which is a lot,
It's insane.
right? Per month,
In America alone.
in
too.
America alone.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I can't speak for them. I don't know their reasons. I'm sure there's various. But I feel like calling is so important,
Mhm.
right? You can't just be a pastor because you want to. God really
Yeah.
has to call you.
Mhm.
But-
Seminary is not like the end all be all for calling, but it is like it is a test.
Mhm.
Like it's much more difficult than people think. Like a lot of people, like I've even received comments of like, oh, like but that's seminary, like that's not like legit school, right? But like
Oh, they don't know.
they had no idea. Like, but like granted, like in their defense, like I also had that mentality going into seminary. Like I thought the only textbook I would need was the Bible. Now I've read more books in these last 2 years than I've read in my entire life. And so it's like it's history and it's relearning dead languages and like theological perspectives, literary. It's like it's a lot. And it's it is tough. But yeah, I agree 100%. I think a lot of people they go into like I even talked to some people in my life who were telling me like, hey, like I'm like thinking about going into ministry. Like I think that'd be cool, right, to be a pastor. And I really don't like. I'm not. I don't know. I forget the word that the kids use nowadays, but like like blocking off like a certain like hobby or whatever it is. Like I'm not even trying to do that. Like I'm just trying to be realistic, and I let him know like, dude, like ministry is not fun. Like it's great and it can be fun and it's so worth it, but it really is something that you have to be called to. Like for example, like listening to PE story, and this is like same for me. Like I heard snippets and bits here and there. This is my first time hearing it in full, and I think it was so encouraging to listen to. But especially in the fact that like that God, I could really sense that God was zealous for PE, right? Like he wanted him to serve, whether it be because of the people that would be saved through his ministry, or whether it's because simply because of PE, probably both, right? Like, but like that kind of like zealousness and like decision that God has like made, but he's faithful to the decision he's made. Like that's important. And I think that's crucial. Like even for me, someone like the patience, right? The people like time and time again that God has sent and the times that I've asked for like signs, like must have been so annoying. But like I was like, no, like I'm still gonna, I'll give you a little something here and there, right? Like, but you have to make the decision.
Right.
Like I'll talk to some people in seminary, and like we'll talk about calling, and and I don't know, like sometimes like I get worried because like they're who knows, maybe there was I have a friend who decided to go to seminary, and he received his calling after he went to seminary because he just had this desire to go into ministry. And that could happen, but like man, like some people, like their view of ministry is so naive. Like I had a there's this guy who I was talking to, and he was going to youth ministry, and he knows this is my point of view because we had a conversation after, and I told him this. But he was serving in a youth position, and he told me like, yeah, but like like I don't think I'm gonna do it anymore. And I was like, why? And he was like, because it's too hard. Like it's way too hard. And for me, the only thing I could think about in the moment was like, dude, those poor kids. Like, and so like even like being called to specific callings within the ministry, I think even that's a very real thing.
Yeah.
Like being called to youth ministry, whether it's for a season or for a lifetime, being called to college ministry or whatever it is, senior pastoring. Because like he came up to me afterwards, and he was like, oh yeah, I left that position, I'm thinking of taking this other youth position. But he made it very clear that like he didn't want to do youth ministry, that he felt like he wanted to do like adults. So like he was just simply viewing like youth ministry as like a temporary like stepping stone.
Right. Kind of like to get up
Yeah.
there.
And he was like, I need the money right now. And I told him straight up, I was like, dude, listen. And I think I was in a bad mood that day, but I was like, listen, man, like for the kids' sake, like if you don't feel like you're being called to youth ministry, like don't take that position. And it's because I seriously do take calling that seriously.
Yeah. I mean, youth ministry is tough. I mean, you're going through it. I went through it. I've been doing it all the way up until 2 years ago now, right? But if you don't have like the calling for it, there's no way. I don't think I would have lasted this long because like youth is so tough, but at the same time so rewarding. And I honestly thought, like I said, I was gonna do youth ministry for my whole life. So I did ministry in that sense. I was just like all in. I was spending time with them like every day, doing all these different things, just to get different youth who have different interests to come to church, to be united. And just they if they are listening, I don't know how many of my former youth are listening, but yeah, I went all in, and just every church I went to, all in, right? Thinking that this is going to be what I'm doing forever. And yes, right now I'm doing like college and up. I guess I should never say never, but I don't see myself ever being a senior or like the lead pastor. But who knows, right? I thought I was going to be youth pastor forever. Here I am doing college and up, which I love. And I'm all in doing college and up too. Yeah. But who knows, maybe another 10 years down the line, I might be a senior pastor, but I hope. I like where I'm at now, right? I really enjoy just focusing on one specific ministry and just like being able to pour all that I have into it. But kind of looking back on just even moving to North Carolina, I really feel like that was of course, that's all part of God's plan. Like if I had stayed in Nova, I don't think I would have been so desperate to even call out to God, right? I think I would have pursued law. Yeah. And so now I see, God took me into, I guess, the wilderness, so to speak. Yeah. Isolated me to a place where like I didn't know anyone, and like forced me to reach out to Him, and all to call me into ministry. Yeah. So I mean, it's no regrets, right? Yeah. No regrets at all. I love ministry. It doesn't mean it's easy, but it's great. Yeah. Seminary, we were saying like it's so tough. It is really tough. Just like so many all-nighters, just writing papers. I think my last semester I was doing like a 10-page paper every week for like theology. But at that point, I could pump out 10 pages. Yeah. I'm like, nothing. I'm just like, I can make the intro like 2 pages long, the conclusion like another 2 pages. So it's really like a 6-page paper. I'm like, no big deal.
You're so good at writing 10-page papers. Yeah. I remember like I told my friends like, and it's become the norm at that point. And so like, at this point, it's so like, it's like, I just feel like I automatically think like papers are like long, and so like
Mhm.
I tell my friends like oh yeah, I got a paper to write, and they're like, how long is it? I'm like 10 pages, and they're like 10 pages, and they like freak out, and they're like what? Because like the longest they write because of their major, whatever it is, like a page, 2 pages,
Maybe like 5 tops.
yeah, 5 tops, and like they like complain about 5 pages,
Yeah.
and like yeah, like we write 10 pages like on the regular.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, we've had some longer. I remember
Right.
doing like 15 to 20,
Right, yeah, me too.
but
yeah.
like, on the average, it's about 10. So at the end, like the last semester, yeah, I had 10-page papers to do, but I was able to do it in like the night before, just pump it out.
I did
It's
that
like
once, yeah.
just get my music on, get like something to drink, have some snacks. I'm just like pumping it out.
Yeah.
But seminary is tough.
Yeah.
But everything you learn from it, I see now it helps. But the only thing I would say is, yeah, they teach you all the things necessary to teach, right, and do ministry, but they don't teach you more of the practical things,
Yeah.
like things that come up in church that you just don't know how to deal with.
Yeah.
And in that sense, I guess seminary, you need more. I guess ministry experience would help with that part. But seminary is so good. If I would say, even for those who don't want to go into ministry, but they're just curious about the Bible,
Yeah.
like honestly, I think every Christian should just audit theology classes, the systematic theology, the hermeneutics.
Mhm.
There's a few of them. I think it'll be good because
Mhm.
that'll get that foundation firm, and after that, you're good. So you don't have to just do seminary just to become a pastor or
Right.
missionary or go into ministry, but just for your own spiritual growth. I
Mhm.
think is very beneficial. I would highly recommend, if you have the time and the I guess the ability to do it, is just take some systematic theology. They go through all the beliefs, the foundation
Yeah.
of your faith, and hermeneutics,
Mhm.
another big one. So that they teach you how to read and interpret scripture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, like I think every church is in desperate need of like good steak, like like uh like seminary training. Like
Mhm.
every Christian is in
Mhm.
need of seminary training.
Right.
Like we're filled with people who are being spoon fed by their pastor every single week and are barely surviving. They're like rationing
Mm.
out here. I had a friend, younger than I, but I went to seminary, got my call and everything. And in the beginning, he was asking me how it was, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm thinking about going to seminary because like I really want to go into ministry, but I don't know if God." And he agreed that he needs to be called, right?
Mhm.
And this is the way I put it to him. I put it to him like very like practically, and I told him like, "Listen, like you can go to seminary, right? Like you don't have to go to seminary and become a pastor. You don't
Right.
have to go to seminary and become a missionary, right? You don't
Right.
have to go into ministry, full-time ministry." But I said, but like think about it like practically, right? Like it's like school. You
Yeah.
have to pay for it.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you have the funds and you have the time, then yeah, like go to seminary, why not? But like he was thinking in terms of like if I go to seminary, I have to go to ministry.
Oh, no.
And that's not true, right?
Yeah.
Like you can go to seminary. Like auditing classes, I believe, are way cheaper,
Oh, yeah.
and you're not being graded, and so like
Right.
you don't get the joy
So
stripped from you.
Right. You can just enjoy the lecture,
Yeah.
And because you're not obviously you don't need to get credit for it unless you're going into ministry.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're just taking it just to learn, the auditing is, I'm thinking about auditing some. I've
Yeah.
been saying that, like,
Mhm.
I think I mentioned that to you like several
Yeah,
times,
yeah,
especially like Hebrew and Greek. I want to audit it again just to like relearn it to refresh myself.
Yeah.
But definitely worth it, because at this point, like for me, since I already been through it, I don't need the credits, so I
Mhm.
can just audit and just enjoy the classes instead of having to worry about all the homework and exams and
Yeah.
all that fun stuff.
Yeah. Exactly. No,
Yeah.
I get that too.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I guess if we were going to move on, I think it might be this story. Well, I found it very interesting. I think it'll be very interesting to our viewers and listeners too. But our mission spotlight for today is North Korea. It's a country I think that we're all kind of intrigued with because we know it's so dangerous. The gospel is not welcome there, obviously, right? A lot of people get persecuted. A lot of missionaries and pastors who go there, they get caught and they get tortured. They sometimes just are put to death. But I had a friend. This is way back when I was in college. A friend, his sister, older sister, was going in and out of North Korea And that time, I don't know because things have changed, I'm sure now. But at that time, her reason for going in and out was that she was a professional singer, and of course she wasn't really, but she sang really well, like way above average. So it's very believable. So she would go in there and like hold concerts. That's what she did, and she'll come out. But she was sharing her stories and that was happening in North Korea, and I find this to be so amazing. I'm just like, God, you're just like, wow, like you're like so above our our knowledge. But she said that they would have like trucks with like megaphones, and they're going around to all the neighborhoods saying like, you're gonna run into people that are gonna share the gospel, and they explain what the gospel is. This is the gospel. They're gonna talk about this and this and this and this, how Jesus is the Son of God and He died for you and your sin, and if you believe in Him, then you'll be saved. And they'll say, but that's not true. Don't believe what they say, right? So they go around neighborhoods sharing the very thing that they don't want people to listen to so that to tell them like not to believe it, which I found is so ironic. They're doing all the gospel sharing for the missionaries, really. All right. And then she also said like once a week they will have in-depth Bible study where they'll say missionaries will come and go through the book of John, this for example, and they'll say like, oh, missionaries are gonna read you John and they're gonna say this and this and this about the scripture. But they'll say, but don't believe it because it's fake, right? It's not true, right? Wow. So isn't that I just crazy. I was hearing that, I'm just like laughing inside because it's like, God, you're so amazing. Like we're so stupid, right? We're so foolish, and that you would use that. And you can use like various ways to share the gospel, and you do that with North Korea. I think that's like so amazing. I don't know about what our viewers would think, but so ironic. They don't want the gospel to be spread, but in order to do that, they're sharing the gospel, saying that this is fake.
Yeah,
right. I think that's amazing. And she was just sharing like they have to. I'm sure this is still true today. They have to be very careful who they open up to because they may seem like they're friendly and they're really genuine and they want to seek the gospel, but the moment you share, they turn you in. So at the same time, we have to remember it's a very serious situation in North Korea. So we shouldn't take it lightly. But the fact that the gospel is working in that way, right? Kind of using them to share the gospel. I just found that to be like so, it's just so, I don't know. There's so many, I don't know how to describe it. It's like so funny, so ironic, just so unbelievable. Yeah. Like God, the fact that they don't think that that's kind of counterintuitive, but yeah, it's just like, God is amazing. That's my conclusion. Is like God is so wow. So yeah, that's our spotlight. It's just kind of I was reminded of that because we had a few. I think like a few weeks ago now, where we had a couple pastors from North Korea come and share at our church their testimony. I was just like blown away by what they went through, how they escaped North Korea, just God's hand and providence and all of that, and it just reminded me of my friend and his sister. So I want to share that as today's mission spotlight.
Even like not even just for the people in the streets hearing the gospel while they were trying to oppose the gospel, but even like those like who are opposing the gospel. Like if you're gonna do an in-depth study on the Gospel of John, then you're gonna have to actually study it and know what you're talking about to say like, hey, by the way, this is not true.
Exactly.
So, like, yeah, like what kind of like work is the Spirit doing even in the North Koreans that are like teaching these like in-depth Bible studies?
Yeah.
I wonder
to train them to teach the
exactly them. Yeah, and so they're being trained also, and like maybe like the Spirit is like edging them to flip sides. But
yeah, I'm sure people came to be saved as they were being trained to teach.
I guarantee
they just, of course, they won't like vocalize it.
Yeah, without a doubt. There's
so I'm sure there are some that say like this is actually the truth in their Bible study.
Yeah, for sure.
When the time was right. I'm sure they didn't just begin with that, but they'll share and be like, hey, this is the actual truth.
That sounds exciting. Yeah, to be a part of.
So honestly, like I want to go to North Korea. And I told my wife that. She's like, you're crazy. You're going to go by yourself. Like me and the kids are not going. Like she cannot go because she's a Korean citizenship. Unless, I don't know if she can once she gets her U.S. citizenship. But for me, I can go. And at some of the churches I served at before, there was some opportunity where they were actually thinking about going to North Korea, but it just kind of fell through. But one day, I don't know. It's just like I don't know what it is. Like if I were to go to missions, I don't know. Maybe it's just something about the danger, or also just the such a need for the gospel in those kind of quote unquote dangerous countries.
Yeah.
That's the draw. But I would like to go to North Korea. My wife and I talked about, after ministry, like way down the line, and we end up, just kind of retiring from church ministry. Would we do missions? And I actually would like to. And I was thinking like Egypt. Another
Really?
like, kind of like, yeah, she's like Egypt, and so we were like kind of researching, and there are actually a good amount of Koreans living there.
Really?
Yeah,
Egypt?
then my wife was able to find like blogs and stuff. There's like a small Korean market, and like
What?
there's yeah. So I was like, hey, see, you can speak Korean there. Like I can share the gospel, but Egypt would be one of those another like kind of like little dangerous, dicey places.
Right,
But
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what it is about that draws me to kind of more the dangerous places.
Mm,
I don't know if I have a chance to ever go,
right.
but I do have a heart for those. I think maybe because it's just harder to reach. Something about that. I just find the challenge, willing to accept that challenge, I guess.
Yeah. Treasures in heaven.
Yeah.
Jewels in the crown.
Yeah. So later, if I end up in Egypt, I'll hit you up and be like, hey,
How is it over there?
come and hang out in Egypt.
All right. Well, I have something from the Christian News for you. I'm just going to read a little segment. This is from ChristianToday.com. I'm going to read a little excerpt from this. It says, in a letter sent to the SBC, which is the Southern Baptist Convention, their executive committee in Nashville, and to the Baptist State Convention of North Carolina, Charlotte-based Elevation Church, which is the church that actually has Elevation Worship,
Right.
said it was withdrawing its affiliation with the Southern Baptist Convention effective immediately. And so the Elevation Church submitted a letter to the SBC's executive committee saying that they would withdraw from the Southern Baptist Convention. What do you think about that?
That's crazy. Well, just to explain, since I was at Baptist Church for a while, the Southern Baptist State Convention is like every state has it, but all the Baptist churches that are part of it, they'll meet together to decide on, like various issues and where they stand together. And then I think once a year they have a nationwide one, so they meet everyone from all the states gathered together. That's the big one, and to decide on various issues. But first, I didn't know that Elevation Church was part of.
Yeah.
I had no idea that they were Baptist either.
Yeah, me too.
So I'm shocked, but at the same time, I don't know how I feel about it because again, I don't know how involved they are in the SBC. But I just find it shocking that they were part of the SBC.
Yeah.
I just thought they were kind of on their own. That was my assumption, I guess, because they're so big, right? I mean, not that the size of the church matters.
Right.
Big churches, small churches, they all can be part of the convention. But I had no idea that they affiliated themselves with Baptist and Southern Baptist at that.
Yeah, exactly.
Because from the teachings, that's not the vibe I got.
Or even like the method of teaching.
Yeah, method of teaching is very like modern and like contemporary.
Right.
So yeah, kind of shocking. I learned something new today.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they're no longer part of it, so. Back to where we started,
right?
But.
So that's exactly why I brought it up, right? Like it wasn't like to attack anyone or anything, but it was just the fact that like I just didn't know, right? Like I didn't know that they were even a part of the SBC. It's like Baptist, right, is one thing, but then the SBC is kind of like even more kind of conservative, and so like I was pretty shocked to find that out, but I was also shocked to hear that it was Stephen Furtick and the church that decided to withdraw their membership in the SBC. So I would have assumed if I knew, I'm sure like nobody knew, right? Like except for the people that are really into denominations. But like I would have assumed that they would actually not kick him out, but like decide to like part ways, even because of like how different they are in approach to ministry and like even like what they teach. And so that's a big deal, right? Like both of those things. But they've been there for a while, I'm assuming. Elevation Church decides to withdraw themselves. And so I'm curious of the reasons why. I don't think the article says why. But yeah. It's interesting. I just thought it was
It
interesting.
is interesting.
Yeah.
So there you go. If you didn't know, Elevation Church was part of
SPC.
SPC. Now you know, and well, now it's back to not being a part of it. So
Yeah, so I
back
guess it doesn't
to
matter,
where
right?
it
But
was.
it didn't really change anything.
Yeah,
but
yeah. But that's interesting.
to close off, we have a reaction video to just a clip. It's a short, like 3-4 minute clip of a sermon. We're gonna watch it. I'm gonna rewatch this. I've seen this many times before. But and then we're just gonna give our 2 cents on it, and we'll close.
Well, actually, before we do that, like I know PSK mentioned like he wanted to be an actor, and there is this commercial that he shot floating
Okay,
around.
all right.
Will we ever do a reaction video to that? I think that would be amazing.
Oh my goodness! Did you plan this before? Or did
No.
you just think of
Now
this?
that hearing your
Oh,
calling
yeah.
story reminded me of that, so I was like,
I see.
let's do a if we
Oh,
get
man.
like any comments wanting it, if we get a significant amount, I won't put a number, but if we get a significant amount, maybe down the
All right,
line,
yeah, sure.
down the line.
If we get enough,
Because it's
people-
an amazing commercial. I think it's such a waste that it's hidden. It's kept hidden.
Wait, have I shown you this commercial?
Yeah.
Oh, I have.
It was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
my
remember.
goodness.
But I loved it. But it's such a waste to have it hidden. The world should see
No, my youth
PSK's
kids.
acting skills. It was amazing. Really.
No,
It's a
no.
commercial acting.
I got paid for it.
Yeah.
It was for a university. But my youth kids, they're dying to see this.
Yeah.
For those who haven't seen it.
So
But sure, I'll do it.
all right.
Yeah,
All right.
okay.
But let's
All
react to this one.
Okay, this is Francis Chan, former head pastor turned missionary turned preacher.
Mm.
In the sense of like he's like going around the world
Like guest speaking. Yeah.
He also, I think he runs like a house church, a home church.
Mm.
I don't know if that's still going on, but I know he's pretty controversial. But I appreciate this man for his genuineness, his love
too.
for the gospel.
Yeah.
Um,
You can really see it.
yeah, like he
Yeah.
wears his heart on his sleeve.
Yeah.
And so, no matter what anyone thinks, I think this is my guy. And,
Mm.
so we're gonna react to a clip of him from years back.
All right.
All right.
Yes. Concern, and I hope it's a concern of yours, is I don't hear people talking about their love for
Man, it would be so nice to preach wearing that. Man,
Instead of suit and tie.
yeah. So restricting.
Yep. Man, that'd be awesome.
That would be awesome.
where are those voices that are just saying, "Oh, I was with Jesus this morning.
Mm.
I love him so much. This is the one thing I pray for all the time is I just want to be in his presence."
Mm.
Man, you guys know when one of your friends falls in love with someone, right? You know when they get obsessive about it,
Mm.
right? Some of you guys know exactly what I'm talking about, and some of you guys are in that world where you're just obsessed with this person. And you know, you meet other people who, once they have a child, it's like all they can talk about is that child. And it's
Mhm.
this obsession, this fascination. You know what it's like when someone is in love. My concern is I don't hear that kind of language when people talk about Jesus.
So true.
Man.
And with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, we'll just be like, oh man,
With the music in the background.
Mm.
it's so good, it's so good, it's him.
He's so genuine.
Mm.
This is the great command. Is that what we see coming out? That's kind of a big deal. The church was supposed to produce these devoted worshipers of God where they can't get enough of him. And there's something so wrong when if we announce, hey, Hillsong's coming, and the place is packed.
Mm.
Versus, hey, we're going to have prayer tonight. And a handful of people show up.
Mm.
There's something really wrong with that.
Mm.
We can't be okay with that. I mean, we're talking about this being up there, all those angels up there just going, whoa, he's so amazing. It should just be, I'm coming into his, who cares who's leading me into his presence? It's his presence that we're just obsessed with. It's like, right? So we know there's something desperately wrong when people walk out of these gatherings and go, oh, it was really good today, or I didn't really like it today. I didn't really like the worship. It didn't really those angels that are screaming out, holy, 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 day and night, ever go looking at you, I didn't really like it today. You think ever in human history? Man, seriously, man,
Mm.
got to understand how weird of a time we are living in. How consumer driven everything's gotten. Like it doesn't make sense biblically. You think ever in the Old Testament? I don't know if I'm going to go to the sacrifice today. Who's sacrificing? Who's getting the bull? Oh, I love it when you know what? It wasn't about that. How did we turn everything where it's perfectly normal to walk away from our gatherings and go, yeah, I don't know. I didn't really like it. Did it ever occur to you that it wasn't for you?
Yeah.
I mean, does it ever enter your mind?
Amen.
Amen. What I noticed about Francis Chan is he stresses. Oh, that's a different video. He stresses the little things,
Mm.
like we're talking about from your devotional, right? Like reading the words of God. He harps on that a lot.
Mm.
Unity has been his like big kind
Yeah.
of thing lately. Like your love for God,
Mm.
like very like Sunday school topics. He'll like take that and he'll blow it up. He'll be
Yeah.
like he'll make that the main thing.
Right.
And I think that's something about that is like so peace giving and
Mhm.
like it I think that's part of why he's like so sincere and so
Mhm.
genuine. It like feeds the soul is what I'm trying to get to
Yeah.
say when you like focus on like things that are so like maybe simple but
Mhm.
like so fundamental
Right.
to the Christian faith. Yeah.
I think I agree with like everything he said. Like, it's true. We can't say we love God and we're just kind of like just sitting there dreading. Maybe some of us just dread going to church, just sitting through service,
Yeah.
because we're just looking forward to the fellowship after. I don't know, but there should be evidence that we love Jesus if we say we do, right? Just like we see evidence what Francis Chan used when we're dating, when we're in love. We don't have to guess. It's so obvious that two people are in love and they're dating each other.
Mhm.
Is it that obvious that we love God? Can other people see it? I mean, how can we be apathetic or emotionless or just dry if we really love God? And the fact that he said like, oh, if Hillsong comes, it's like packed, and prayer is only a handful. I just reminded of when Paul was reprimanding the church, saying like, you say, oh, some follow Paul, some follow Apollos, but they're just men.
Mhm.
He's like, it's about God,
Mhm.
right? Maybe that still goes on today,
Yeah.
right? If it's elevation worship, if it's Hillsong, we're like, oh yeah, we'll go. We're not really going for God. We're just going to go see this amazing, praise team,
Yeah.
or worship team. And same with the preaching. I saw that in our seminary, because in seminary you have chapel Tuesdays and Thursdays, and it's kind of required. You have to go X amount of times per semester,
Mhm.
and every time David Platt comes, it's like packed. I mean, seriously, packed. If you don't come early, like you're just gonna have to stand the whole service. But if it's someone else that's lesser named, it's like, I mean, it's still pretty full because attendance is kind of mandatory.
Yeah.
But you could tell there's a big difference.
Mhm.
And so it's in the same way, it's like, are we going to Sunday service, or are we going to attending like a revival or something because of a speaker that's coming, or because there's a certain praise team or worship team that we like that's coming,
Mhm.
or are we truly going there to seek God?
Yeah.
Right? And if we're going there to seek God, it shouldn't matter who's there,
Yeah.
right? Whether it's me preaching or Francis Chan speaking, right? It should be a packed house,
Mhm.
right? It should the person shouldn't matter. And even at the end when he was saying, "Oh, I didn't like it," that's not the standard, right? We don't worship when we feel like it or because we like what's going on. We worship because He's God, and we're commanded to worship, and
Mhm.
we love Him, so we should worship.
Yeah.
It's all about Him. At one point, I don't know when, it has turned into what I want. The standard has become, my standard is right. So I didn't like the preacher. I didn't like the sermon. I didn't like the songs. So the worship was bad. That's not, our standard is not important.
Yeah.
It's about God. So I really agree with what he says. Like, it's just been on my heart for particularly the past few months.
Yeah.
I'm trying to revive worship, trying to rethink worship, trying to get people excited for worship. All because if we truly do love God, we should be excited. It's like there should be a sense of anticipation. We talked about that when we talk about worship, how like we anticipate, we get excited and get all dressed up and for a date. Do we have that same excitement for coming to church, or do we just throw on whatever is clean and then just kind of wake up and just kind of leave, to service?
Or the flip of that, you do put attention into like what you wear and stuff, but it's to elevate you yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with what Pastor Francis Chan was saying. That's a good word. That's very true. But yeah, I guess in closing, if you like, comment, subscribe, if you want to see this infamous commercial that PSK shot, comment in our IG. I think TikTok's going to go up soon, and our YouTube channel. Comment if we get enough. We might do a reaction video. We might do an unveiling. I don't know. We can make that like a main segment. Maybe we'll just like analyze and critique. Would PSK have succeeded as an actor, or not? I don't know. But we'll see what we can do. I think it's a shame that we keep it hidden. This amazing commercial.
All right. Yep. All right. We love you guys. I had a good time.
Yeah.
We'll
me too.
We'll be back next week.
All right. Take care. See you next time.